All right, welcome everyone. It is 1 minute past 1 Eastern, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Molly Yanis, and I am the founder of Echo Consulting, and we are super pumped that you guys joined us today to talk about configuring blueprints in Smartsheet's Control Center. So hopefully that is why you are joining us. A quick intro to Echo to get us going. So Echo Consulting is all about project management solutions and solutions that fit. So blending people, process, and technology, driving digital transformations, increasing transparency, improving accountability, and removing friction. So today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Kiefer Welsh, who's going to be helping me in actually walking through all of the super exciting configuration settings in Control Center. Kiefer, can you say a quick hi?
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
Kiefer is one of our awesome implementation consultants, and you'll see that he is a solutioneer. And yes, he did come up with that himself. It is an awesome word, and it really speaks to Echo and the way we love to approach solutions with our clients. And that is really digging into that championship, that ability to really take a problem and look at what the options are for solving it. So that solutioneer. And again, Molly Yanis, founder and a solution architect here at Echo Consulting, also known as the Question Queen. And you can see that we did do all those fun certifications that you may or may not be aware of through Smartsheet. But even better than that, we both have lots and lots of implementations under our belt. So we are very open to questions as we go along. So before I dig in specifically on Control Center and then pass it off to Kiefer to do the demo, I do want to just ground us. So in Smartsheet, there is the core Smartsheet platform. And with that, you can definitely have, enterprise versus business versus individual. But a lot of our clients have been moving up to Advanced, which is Smartsheet's kind of platform solution that brings in a lot of their different, what we call add-ons. So today we're going to be talking about Control Center, which is their PMO, PPM, project portfolio management focused. And it really focuses on that governance aspect of project management at scale. And Kiefer is going to be talking a lot more in depth about that. But in addition to Control Center, there are other add-ons that Smartsheet has with a wide variety of other use cases. So some of them include Data Shuttle, Dynamic View, Data Mesh, Calendar, Pivot. They also have some pre-built connectors that they have, as well as some additional licensing and components specifically around resource management and brand folder. So we're not going to go too deep into the connectivity with resource management today and Control Center, but do be aware that there is connectivity options between Control Center and resource management, which is that capacity planning functionality. And we'll kind of start from that. For most of these other add-ons, they are not currently working out of the box with Control Center, with the exception of portfolio apps and work apps. And again, I don't think we're going to have a chance to go too deep into that today, but just being aware that if you have recently purchased Smartsheet Advance or you are looking at purchasing Smartsheet Advance, be aware that these are, for the most part, standalone add-ins currently, with the exception of Control Center does allow for portfolio apps now, and there is connectivity with resource management. Kiefer, anything I missed there?
No, you mentioned portfolio work apps, correct?
Yep, I did.
Okay.
All right, so the way that Smartsheet, they're actually in the process of kind of rebranding some of their add-ons and trying to talk a little bit more about kind of the use cases and how Smartsheet is used. So again, today we're going to be focusing on this portfolio management component and Smartsheet for PPM, which really is that Control Center component of it. And then this is the way that Smartsheet likes to articulate some of the different value propositions of what they're working on. Alrighty. So before I pass it over to Kiefer to get into the nitty gritty, at a high level with Control Center, it's going to be able to automate project creation so that you can have a standard project template set that is created. And it's going to help you not only create that project template set, but aggregate that data so that you can provide information across your organization. And it also is going to allow what they call global updates, but really what it's going to allow is for kind of that governance, which is if you want to change something across all of the projects within a blueprint, you're going to be able to do that. Again, setting up Kiefer for success here. Today, we're going to be talking about configuring a blueprint. We will be doing another workshop on more of the global updates and managing Control Center longer term. But if you're here today, we're learning about Control Center blueprint, what a blueprint is, and how to configure it for success. And one more definition before I pass it off to Kiefer. So what is a blueprint? So a blueprint is this repeatable set of sheets, reports, assets, basically, that make up a project. So if you went to one of our previous webinars, we might have talked about, creating a workspace or creating a folder and saving as new. Control Center is kind of that next step up, making it project management at scale so that you can have that templated solution for an individual project and set that up. So Kiefer is going to walk you through it a little bit more detail, the different components of a blueprint. But at its core, the data sources that we're going to be looking at are sheets, right? Developing those reports and dashboards and things like that. Kiefer, I think that is it for me. So I'm going to pass it off to you.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I wanted to start off my piece of this with a high-level diagram, kind of my personal conceptualization of Control Center and how it interacts with Smartsheet and all those different assets or templates that Molly just mentioned. I have Control Center here as kind of the center of this diagram, and I think that's pretty appropriate because I look at Control Center simply as a mechanism, right? As Molly mentioned, it automates a lot of that manual effort you'd be going through if you're saving as new and creating these projects manually, but it does a whole lot more than that. This is really something that you're going to grow into with your Smartsheet process and your environment. It's not something that we see our clients and our organizations diving right into. Smartsheet will tell you the threshold is about a dozen projects. If you have more than a dozen projects, you should consider using Control Center. Again, that is highly dependent on the complexity of those projects, how many sheets, reports, dashboards each of those projects have, how many things you're renaming, how many cell links you're making. But the value that Control Center offers us is the ability to automate that process, remove any potential manual error, and just simplify our lives and give us that room to grow and increase the volume of our projects. Excuse me.
One of the big things, Kiefer, right, is also, do you have a standard project toolkit, right? So do you have most of the project components that you need are the same across projects? That's a big driver, right? We definitely have organizations that have a wide variety of different types of projects that maybe don't immediately go to Control Center. So it really depends on the standardization. We call it maturity of your PPM and your PMO. So those are some of the questions that we like to ask clients that are asking, like, hey, does it make sense for us to go to Control Center? If you are very early in your PPM methodology and you don't have those processes down and you're really still working on structuring kind of what your PPM data looks like, going to Control Center can definitely kind of slow down some of that, initial flexibility as you figure it out. At the same time, if you already have that process really well in place, Control Center can be a major superpower for you as you do to scale operations. So definitely something that we like to talk about, right, from a consulting side of things versus immediately diving in. But for today, we are assuming that you have Control Center, and I will pass it back off to Kiefer.
Yeah, all great stuff there, Molly. I think it is important to not rush this step into Control Center because with all the value that it brings to you and your organization, there's a cost, and that cost is you're tying yourself to these templates that are being produced time and time again. And yes, Control Center has the ability to make edits to those templates, but like everything, there is limitations. So what we don't like to see is somebody a client to get Control Center, produce all these projects, and then realize, hey, they want to change this and they can't do it now, and they have all these projects, and it just becomes kind of a nightmare. But yes, moving forward, we're going to operate on the assumption that you have a well-established template toolkit. You refer to them as templates, assets, artifacts. I promise I will call them templates from here on out. And that is represented by this up here. So you can see this gray rectangle is kind of represents our toolkit and the items within that. You can see a metadata sheet, a metric sheet, project plan. I'll go ahead and show you what this could look like in the Smartsheet environment. So this is actually the folder that would be our template toolkit. And you can see all those assets right here. So we have our project plan, we have a resourcing asset template, we have a dashboard, a crate log, which we're a big fan of here at Echo, and then the various reports and kind of the background mechanics of what collects the data and pushes it throughout the solution. This all really starts with an intake sheet represented here. And before I go any further, these blue and teal lines represent data flow, teal being one direction, blue being the other direction. But truly, this all starts with your intake sheet and the data that you use to create these projects. Because what Control Center is going to do is take that data and that information from your intake, map it however you've told it to map into your template toolkit, and make a copy of it and make that project.
What are some of the other things that people call intake sheets, though, right? Does everyone know what an intake sheet is? So an intake sheet is that initial kind of list of projects that you might have, both projects that may be happening and projects that may not be happening yet, and you're kind of going through that initial prioritization exercise or project selection exercise. So there's many different ways that clients use this, but I do want to be very clear because we use intake. Smartsheet uses the term intake. You'll see in the blueprint it says intake, right? Project intake is usually a project list, a list of projects that are potential projects, as well as projects that are approved. So it's kind of that portfolio list of each project being a separate row. Sorry to interrupt, Kiefer, go ahead.
No, that's great. Sometimes I get blinded by assuming people know what I'm referring to. So I pulled up the demo intake that we use and drives this demo solution. And just to Molly's point, you can see there's multiple projects here in different stages of approval. You can see one has actually already been created. But, again, another big value add that Control Center brings to the table is taking this entry level kind of, initial project information and marrying it with all the data that comes along that project throughout its lifespan. That's a tremendous value add by Control Center because it's going to make all those connections. It's going to push all that data where you tell it to push it every single time without you having to do it. It's like 113 steps or something that it does every time it provisions the project, and we love it for it. Diving back into this diagram, the other half of it, I like to think about Control Center as a Xerox machine at its most basic sense. It's just making a copy of a template set, but on the outset of that Xerox machine is where it consolidates and rolls up all the data that we can report on at the portfolio, your program level, whatever you want to do with it. Control Center takes that information from the intake sheet, merges it into the project, and then any data points that you care about throughout that project's lifespan gets all pushed out the other side. And that's what we use for our reporting. Next. Without further ado, I think we should just dive right into Control Center. I don't know if you have any objections, Molly, anything you want to call out?
I love it, Kiefer. Keep going.
All right, this is what Control Center looks like. This is the home landing page. You can see it tracks your active projects as well as your archive projects, with a whole other can of worms that we probably won't talk about today. But if I go up into this manage programs option, I can see all my blueprints. You have your options for your global updates, automations. We're not going to get in that today, but what we care about is this Echo SEC demo. As opposed to creating a new blueprint from scratch, we're just going to walk you through an existing one. All the tabs are the same regardless. So if we were making this blueprint from scratch, we would see the exact same thing as we see going in to edit an existing blueprint. It just made more sense to do it like this. So I'll go ahead and open up.
Can I pause for just 1 second? Sorry. So a lot of clients we're seeing initially got Control Center rolled out with Smartsheet, and they configured a single blueprint. And they're looking to make the decision about whether or not they should separate out into 2 blueprints, right? So today we're going to be talking about configuring a blueprint. There's a couple things I want to mention here. One, right now, we can't duplicate a blueprint. So we are actually starting from scratch to create a new one, right? for a blueprint, you can't move projects between blueprints, right? So if a project was provisioned through one blueprint, it is staying with that blueprint. So if you are making a decision to split out, and maybe you have one blueprint and you want to add another one, be aware. Now, again, we can do reporting. We're not getting too deep, but I just want to be clear that there are some limitations with that, right? Which is each blueprint is individual, right? And the projects underneath it are individual. And so if you have a blueprint that's established, certainly you can look at that blueprint compared to and use it to provision a new blueprint, but you are not duplicating that blueprint at this point. Kiefer, sorry, I just wanted to make sure here. So like in this example, we have 5 blueprints. We're going to pull up the demo blueprint and walk you through how we configure that blueprint. It's not something that can be copied. You do have to provision a new blueprint every time. Sorry, Kiefer, go ahead.
No, great point. We'll open it up and take a look. So this is the first screen you'll be greeted with, right? It's your opportunity to name the blueprint, write a brief description. It's not required, but can help you just kind of keep, if you're juggling multiple blueprints, you know which one does. And then you're posing the question of where do you want to store these projects, right? This drop down allows us a couple different options. It allows us to create a new workspace for each project. You can have a pre-selected workspace, or you could have the user who's provisioning that project make that decision for you. There's benefits to each one of these options. Creating a new workspace is, we typically see clients go with pre-selected workspaces because that helps you and allows you to manage permissioning on these projects a lot easier. If you know where these projects are going to end up every time, you can control the permissioning in that workspace to set the appropriate permissions for your team members, what they'll need access to, what they want. We also have control of that within the blueprint. That last tab here over on the right, you can see we'll get to it, but it's permissioning and sharing. That's just the default permissions you can set on each project. But for the storage, again, we typically see clients pre-selecting a workspace. Again, this really helps us when it comes to reporting because we can point reports at that entire workspace. And there are things called dynamic report scopes, which essentially just add new project data, new project templates to the report as they're provisioned. So you don't have to, if you create a project, you don't have to go into the report and add it to the source data of that report. Control Center will do that for us.
So the big thing, right, is if you enable users to select the workspace, you are not able to auto provision. So if you know that it's going to create a new workspace or pre-selected workspace, you have the option to what's called auto provision, which means literally you check a box from the intake sheet and it automatically creates a project. Otherwise, if you want them to select the workspace, it does require someone to come in here and click, go ahead and provision a project. You're still talking about a button instead of all the other things you have to do to set up a new project if you're using it in Smartsheet Core. But do be aware that if you pre-select the workspace or create a new workspace, you can auto provision just based on a checkbox from the intake sheet. If not, you do have to have a user come in here and say, start a new project.
Yep, and that'll also play into your Control Center permissionings, right? Because we are limited with who has access to the actual Control Center environment. And this is a fun note. You do actually have to be an additional lead within Control Center to be able to create a blueprint. And I believe there's a limit of 5 additional leads.
Yep, that's correct. So 2 different things.
Again,
one is creating a blueprint and one is creating a project, right? The program users can create projects, right? So you can have your program manager, your project manager create a project if you need them to select the workspace. But in terms of creating a blueprint, you can only have 5 people right now.
Correct. I guess my point was, Molly, that if you wanted these projects to be created by somebody who doesn't have access to Control Center, doing that pre-selected workspace and having that automation in the background, allowing them to just check a box on the intake sheet and provision that project without even going into Control Center is sometimes valuable depending on your use case.
So many options. Let's keep
going.
I would
just say, hey, this is Kelly, another Echo team member. I would just say another consideration when you're setting up your project storage is what your PMO structure looks like, what you need for your program level reporting, if you have work streams. So it's hard to like call out every single use case there, but just something to note that that's kind of one of the decision maker points there as well. Because you might want projects within a specific program to be in a program level workspace, which is a common configuration that we've worked on with clients.
And Kelly brings up another good point, which is one, you can update this in your product settings even after you started using the blueprint. And even if you do go ahead and put it into a pre-selected workspace, we do have clients that will then drag and drop it into another workspace, and that does not break any of the connectivity. So lots of options. There is a reason why people get help implementing Control Center. All right. Sorry, Keeper. Great call out, Kelly.
Yeah, and that brings up another tidbit, which is you can't, the projects just land in the workspace. You can't put them into a folder, right? So they just land as the folder in the workspace. And then another tidbit, anything tied to your blueprint needs to be shared with your primary lead. So for us, that is our primary lead is this demo account. But any asset that you are going to use, whether that's the workspace, the template, the intake sheet, they all have to be shared with the Smartsheet or the primary lead within your Control Center solution. And Control Center does a really good job of calling this out. So if that's not the case and you go to create a blueprint and let's say that primary lead doesn't have access to the intake sheet, as soon as you open up the blueprint, it's gonna tell you. And it'll do that throughout the entire process. When it notices things that are different, it's going to call that out to you and really help you either, correct what should be corrected or make a different decision. Our next option here and our next tab is going to be our template settings. So again, I have told Control Center where to look for my template within this folder, and it's saying, hey, this is everything I found within that folder. And right off the bat here, we have the ability to include or neglect and not include certain templates based on what we're trying to do. We have the ability to set them as either required, optional, or optional unselected. The difference being there is like it's an optional template, but it defaults to selected or it defaults to unselected. So whoever's provisioning that project sees it as an optional template and they can either include it or not include it on a project by project basis. And then this launch designation here, Control Center will create a URL link to one of your template sheets. Usually for us, that's the dashboard for the project that rolls up all the project information, but that's designated here with this launch, and you can set that to be any of those templates within that template folder. And again, kind of diving back and circling back to the idea of Control Center is going to call things out to you throughout this whole process. If I were to add a new template to that folder and go back into this blueprint, it's going to find that template and call it out and say, hey, we found a new template. Do you want to include it? Or the opposite, hey, we went looking for this template. It's no longer there. Do you want to remove it? Which is a very helpful characteristic of Control Center. And again, we love it for it. Advanced options. This is just whether or not you want to give descriptions to your templates and or allow attachments from the intake sheet to go to those templates. Not something we see commonly used, but worth noting. Blueprint components is going to be our next settings page. Again, you can see we have our intake sheet. Summary rollup is that output of information I was referring to on this diagram. So it's the culmination of the intake level data and the project level data that Control Center will tie up, make all pretty for you, and spit out the other side. That is what it refers to as summary reporting, summary sheet. We'll get into that down here in this blueprint summary section. Dynamic report scopes, or what I mentioned previously, they are essentially Smartsheet reports. The dynamic piece of that is that they are tied into your blueprint, and you can tell them that you only care about one template. So instead of pointing at a report at your project workspace with all your projects in it that have all your project templates, and then filtering that report to get to the specific information you want, these dynamic report scopes allow us to say, hey, I only care about information on the project plan. And I care that new projects are continuously added to this report. So every time a project is provisioned, Control Center will look through your dynamic report scopes, and pull and add that specific template to that report so you can do whatever you want to do with it, report on it, summarize it. Resource management panel, this is to Molly's point, the interconnectivity between resource management and control center. That is an option here. It's worth noting that I am fairly certain, well, I thought they made intake sheets mandatory, but maybe I was wrong in that.
No, they don't anymore.
It's always changing. So this next sheet is going to refer to our intake settings, right? It's going to be where you designate what sheet is your actual intake sheet. You can see this SEC demo intake. That's this right here. We have the ability to determine what the name of the project is going to be, what column that's coming from. For us, it's just the project column. That'll be incorporated into the naming convention of the projects down the line. You can see that in the naming tab over here. We'll get to it. Approval column, that is exactly what it sounds like. It's a column within the intake sheet, usually a checkbox, or I guess it could be a status as well. But it's essentially denoting that the project has gone through your internal approval process and can be provisioned. If this checkbox on this intake sheet right here, project approved, is not checked, it will not show up as able to be provisioned within Control Center. And again, those approval processes look different wherever you go, but that is where you would denote, hey, this is the column that we're going to use to say yes or no, and then you tell it the value for a checkbox is just going to be true. And then on the output of that, we want to denote which projects have been created, and that we're going to use the project created checkbox. The value is going to be true. We go back to the intake. You can see the column right here. When the project is provisioned, there's that URL link I was talking about. It's going to check that box automatically to let you know, hey, there's a project within Control Center associated with this line item. Any questions so far? Take a pause, breathe a little bit. Okay. Project link column. Again, that's going to be the link to the artifact or template that we denoted on this page, right? So it's going to be this dashboard, the project dashboard, and the column that you designate is going to be where that link shows up. So we're just going to say it's going to show up in the project URL column. That's exactly where that link showed up, and this will bring us to this project's dashboard if we open it. Intake attachments, again, this is going to be where you manage what happens to attachments that are attached at the row level on the intake sheet, and where those would go if you cared about something like that. If you wanted to take, hey, like a purchase order or a request for proposal, whatever it is, and push it down the line into one of these project level templates, you have that ability. Filtering projects by user. This essentially is where you would control what projects each person could provision, right? So if I wanted to say, hey, Molly as a project manager can provision projects, but I only want her to be able to provision her projects, I can denote that here and say, hey, the current user can only provision a project where they are assigned as a project manager. Something that's nice to have. I don't see it commonly used, but again, this is really, you can make it any way you want. Now we get into the idea of profile data. Profile data is essentially the data points that you're telling Control Center to care about, right? And these data points are what it finds on the intake sheet. So these are fields that all exist on the intake sheet. And we're going to denote these as, hey, Control Center, we care about these, and we want to see these pop up in project level templates, but then also at the other end at your output, we want to be able to report on these profile data points throughout the lifespan of the project. Profile data does not have to come from the intake. It can, but it can also be generated from within the project. Project level assets or templates have, let me see here if I can pull this up for you guys. So if we look at our project plan, at the top here, we have this summary section. Wherever Control Center sees the word summary in the primary column and it's a parent row, anything underneath that, it will automatically assume not automatically. It will want to assume that it's profile data. You can manage what it does with it, but Control Center is going to look at this template and recognize that these data points could be profile data, and it's going to call that out. So if we go back to the settings, we've told it which ones we care about, and it is calling that out. You can see it right here. It found actual finish date on the intake sheet, the project plan, and the metadata sheet. Because again, it's looking through those templates, it's seeing that summary designation, and anything underneath that, it's going to say, hey, found this piece of profile data, what do you want to do with it? That functionality, the customization of what we want to do with that profile data happens on this page. So you can see, you'll see all the profile data points that we selected on the previous tab here. But this, if we check this show advanced setting, this is where we can tell it, hey, I want this to be dynamic, I want this to flow one way, or I want this to flow both ways. So create a date, for example, it's finding on the intake and it's asking, well, what template should that appear on? Right now we have it selected as metadata. So it will take that piece of information from the intake and push it into the metadata sheet every single time it creates a project for that project, right? But it needs more information than that. Where is it going to push that information? You need to give it a target column to map that data point to, but then also tell it where to grab that data point from the intake, which is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of redundant, but that's what we're doing here. We're telling it, hey, we want you to map this data point to the date column on this selected template sheet, and you're going to be pulling it from the create date column on the source sheet or the intake sheet. And then we can denote the behavior of that linkage, if you will, whether that's a cell link, which is managed at the intake. So whatever changes on the intake will populate on the metadata sheet, whether that's a one-time write. So whatever value is on the intake sheet will just write one time to that metadata sheet and won't be dynamic. So if it changes one place, it's not going to change the other. Or if it's an editable value, the editable value comes into play when you are provisioning projects through Control Center. These fields that are designated as editable values can be edited in real time while you're provisioning the project. Molly, I'm pretty sure I got that right, but do correct me if I'm wrong.
Nope,
the value there
right.
is if something were to change that you knew about and you wanted to make that change while you're provisioning, you can do that within Control Center. You don't have to go back to the intake sheet, change it, save it, well, go back into Control Center. Makes it a little bit more intuitive. But you can see at this point, I would like to talk about the metadata sheet and the purpose that serves, since it kind of came up right here. I'll show you what the metadata sheet would look like and how I typically structure my metadata sheets. They live in these admin folders within the project template toolkit. And this is what they look like, right? So we typically are going to have.
Can I jump in just 1 second just to contextualize this, because this is awesome? Okay, guys, so normally when Echo gets involved with a client, they have a concept of a project plan or like if they're looking to implement in Control Center, as Kiefer said a couple of times, right? They have a series of assets, right? They may or may not have this metadata sheet, right? This is something that we use sometimes to help with cell linking and things like that, even if it is core. But this is something that is a really powerful sheet that is specifically used for Control Center as a data connectivity point. So if you might be in Smartsheet, you already have solutions, you might be used to having kind of like reference or data sheets that you pull information from. This is kind of like all of that project information, right, that you want to be able to maintain. If you've run into that situation where you have an intake sheet or a project list, but you don't want individual project managers going in there to update it or seeing all of the different projects, this is this really cool spot that says, okay, maybe the project manager is just updating the project metadata here, but then they can kind of do that. So anyways, I just want to contextualize what this metadata sheet is. If you're using Smartsheet right now and you're just using a project plan and you're using some reports and a dashboard, you might not have this, but this is definitely something that you need, right, and or want as part of Control Center.
Yeah, it's the consolidation of the data at the project level, essentially. And it can be as much behind the scenes thing as you want. You typically see these sheets kind of locked down. As you can see, I have all the columns and all the rows locked because this is this is where the information and the data is going to land from the intake sheet, but it's also going to be consolidation of that project level data to tee it up for Control Center to push it into the next phase of the project lifecycle, if that makes sense. You can see we have a couple helpful tips and tricks here. Those are the columns that I denoted within the customization of the blueprint. Customization of the profile data. So the target column's date, you can see on this metadata sheet, we have that date column right here. It's always best practice to denote what kind of data it is, whether it's just a date or a number or a symbol. Again, you want to have distinct columns for those different data types, and those are going to be where you map them. So if we went to, a symbol, let's see if we have project health, that's going to the health column, and that's going to be specifically a symbol column, because if you were to map that, like a symbol, into a text column, it's just going to come through as green or yellow. And that's you can still use that, but it's not the best thing on the planet.
So different column types. Name the column type something logical so that you can choose the right column to put the data into. This gets more complicated when we talk about project plan and things like that might have different column types and orders and things like that. But for the metadata sheet, it should be pretty standard based on the different types of columns you have for the different types of data you have.
Spot on. Our next tab in our setting is going to be blueprint summary. We'll defer back to this overarching diagram. These are going to be these summary sheets, right? It's going to be on the outset, the output, and the way I think about it of Control Center. We are going to want to set up these sheets before we set up Control Center. Primary lead's going to have access to it. But again, you select that sheet. I have that sheet opened up here. That's what this looks like. Essentially, it's just going to be a massive catch-all of all of your data that's both intake and project level. It's going to have a column for each profile data field. Fun fact, it's going to populate these columns for you. So you just need to create a blank grid with whatever defaults to. I think it's 4 columns with a primary. Name it something that that makes sense for you. And then when you get to this page, you're going to select that sheet. You're going to tell it where this profile data is going to come from. This ties back into the concept of a metadata sheet and what we use it for as kind of a consolidation of the project level data to tee it up for this very thing. We're going to tell Control Center that this summary sheet is going to be fueled by the metadata sheet, but it can also be fueled by any other template within the toolkit. So in this circumstance, we have the project plan also fueling the summary sheet. And within that project plan, I think I have it pulled up. I don't. Okay, but I can navigate to it here. These are the profile data points that it will pull from that project plan to that summary sheet. The primary designation here is telling Control Center which one to prioritize. So if it finds start date on both of these templates, it's going to take the start date from the primary template, whatever you tell it to be the source of truth. And that's just something to keep in mind when you're pushing profile data points around your templates. If it does find a piece of profile data in multiple templates and you're telling it to push both to the summary, it's going to take that primary one. Just a tidbit there. It's going to show us.
Quick question on the summary sheet. When you said for the summary sheet, it's going to put all this information in, but you still need to create the summary sheet and put the right column names in and the right column types in, correct? Or is it going to generate it all through?
You create the sheet, you designate it as the summary sheet in the blueprint, you select the profile data points you want to map there. And as soon as you save that blueprint, Control Center is going to go into that summary sheet and populate all those columns for you. It's going to save you a ton of time. I've made the mistake of manually making those columns before and felt a little foolish, but that is a pretty valuable thing. I'm not sure if you've seen it operate differently, but that's my understanding, Molly.
Nope, that's mine as well, because I have also felt a fool after trying to create the perfect summary sheet.
Yeah. Yep. At the bottom of this sheet, we're going to see this intake summary section. I'm not sure why they hide it down here. they're not hiding it, but for the value that this offers us, I would love to see it a little bit more out in front. This is going to allow us to push data in the opposite direction, right? So up until now, data from the intake sheet has flowed into Control Center. Control Center's made a copy of the template toolkit and mapped that data into that template, and it's spitting it out the other side to the summary sheet. This is going to give us the ability to map data from within the project back to the intake, right? So you can see here, we've denoted that the template it's going to use for this is the project plan. And these profile data points are what we care about landing back on the intake. So it makes sense a lot of times for start dates, percent completes, project healths to kind of fall into this category. But it is very, it's a slippery slope. There's only 20 fields. You're limited to 20 fields to be able to do this with, which leaves a little bit to be desired. But it is valuable to be able to get that project level information back to the intake, specifically if you're managing your projects from that intake. If that intake is where your admin is managing these portfolio projects, it's extremely valuable to be able to push project information back to that, and it's going to be a live link. So if you look into the intake, if we went over to one of those fields, oops, let's go to actual start date, or just these healths.
Kiefer is bringing up a major decision point here, and lots of it depends, right? So you have the ability to do a summary sheet, which is that sheet that's kind of after, right? Projects have been provisioned, and the intake sheet has projects that both have been provisioned through Control Center as well as potential projects, right, that might not have been provisioned through Control Center. So there's a decision point here, which is, do you want Control Center to push the information back to the intake sheet? Do you want it to only push to a summary sheet, which is for information like for projects that have been after provisioned? There is value to both. But every time you create multiple different data sources and things like that, right, where does it go to? Where does the report go to? So there's a critical kind of architecture and or decision here. And Kiefer is correctly calling out some limitations in terms of the number of pieces of data that you can do this for. So there's a lot here. He's kind of giving you guys some of the tips here, but like this is a big decision, I think, in most of our clients about whether or not some of them have only done the intake sheet and manage everything through the intake sheet, which is nice if you have a small enough portfolio. But at some point, right, that leaning into that summary sheet piece is important as well. So actual start is a great example, which is like, do you want the actual start to be automatically updated in your intake sheet? Or do you want the intake sheet to have that be the data source for an executive stakeholder or something like that? And the intake, and then the project plan is a different data source, and then you're looking at differentials. So there's a lot of key design decisions here based on requirements, but you do have the capability in both directions. Sorry to go ahead, Kiefer.
No, it's another very valuable contribution. I think, another note there would be, it depends on how you are managing the intake sheet. Some organizations lock it down and don't let people that have access to it. Other organizations let their project team members edit things on the intake sheet, right? But if they don't have access to it, this could make sense for you. But again, to your point, what you don't want is to end up in the situation where some sources of truth for data points exist on the intake and some only exist in the summary sheet. Now you're creating reports looking one way and some reports looking the other way. Consistency here is really key, and it's going to help you out in the long run. Any questions at this point? I'm going to keep rolling.
15-minute warning, Kiefer.
15 minutes, we got this. Dynamic report scopes. I call them dynamic scope reports. I mix it up all the time. Again, these are going to be those reports that only look at one template within your toolkit, right? So it's the same functionality of a Smartsheet report. You select the data source, you select the filter criteria, you can group it, summarize it, whatever you want to do. The difference being Control Center knows about this report, and it's going to manage the scope of that report every single time a project is provisioned. This can be really helpful if you're dealing with high volumes of projects, because again, pointing a report simply at the project workspace, you're looking at all those templates and those are really ballooning out your source sheets for that report. I think the hard limit is 10,000, and I found that the hard way. But again, these dynamic report scopes, you set it up in Smartsheet. You find that report here. You just kind of browse for it. It's just probably wasn't advisable to click on that, but we're here now. And then you tell it what piece of that template toolkit you want the information from. So typically it can, it could be that metadata sheet. It could be the project plan. Again, whatever you're looking to roll up, these dynamic report scopes are a great way to do that and do it consistently and not have to do it manually. Limitation here, I believe, is 50. I'm confident in that number, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. So you are limited with the amount that you can add to your blueprint, and they get a little cumbersome to manage because they just, it just lists it down. The report number 2 would fall under here. So you can imagine a list of 50 of these with different names and different filter criteria. It can get a bit hard to manage, but tremendous resource for rolling up data and conserving kind of the bandwidth of your Smartsheet solution and avoiding running into those ceilings.
So CRADE example, we love CRADE, right? Changes, risks, issues, actions, decisions. So if we think about it, we want a decision log for an executive stakeholder. We want to be able to pull in all the CRADE sheets across all the different projects within a blueprint, and then use that filter to say, hey, we only want the ones that we want to show to the executive team or something like that. So pulling in across everything. So can be very, very powerful, both from a portfolio and programmatic way.
And since I don't have a dynamic scope report here, I'm going to have to back through and deselect it so we can progress beyond it. No big deal. But we would have ended up on this naming page regardless. This is where you're going to tell Control Center how to name your projects. It's going to give you the option of all the profile data points, whether or not you want that to be a prefix or suffix. And then you can apply different naming conventions to the project assets versus the folder that they land in or the workspace. So an example of that would be for the project level artifacts, you can look here. We are using our unique ID as a prefix to all of these artifacts. Templates is what I agreed upon. So it's just going to stick that ID in front of that, whatever that template name is. And again, you run into character limits, things get cut off. So it's important to consider that when you're choosing how to name these projects. But that's where we're going to do it. And if I was in a situation where I wanted the project name also to be part of that, so it would show up, PMO 001 and then like Kiefer, then Echo project plan, that's where I would do it. But that can, again, it can cut things off. I can denote a different naming convention to conserve the folder level assets. I could remove the project and have the ID as a suffix for the folder and workspace. There's a lot of different options, but that's where you would be doing those kind of changes.
I hadn't seen the exclude blueprint option, blueprint folder before. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Great.
I tell you, they're always sneaking things in here.
Yeah.
Okay. Last and final page, permissioning and sharing. This is where you're going to set your default permissions for the project's templates and the different artifacts within that toolkit. You can denote whether or not the primary leads within the Control Center environment are going to be owners or admins. Whoever creates the project, you can designate what their permission level is going to be. Again, this brings up more questions of how are you going to be making these projects, who is going to be actually provisioning them. But then you have the ability to set users as default admins or editors. And then you can also add groups, which is very handy. Again, this is a big decision whether you want to manage it this way or whether you want to manage it at a workspace level. Arguably, both can have produce a same desired result, but it can get a little muddy if you try to do both at the same time. So just a decision to keep in mind when you're building your blueprint.
Yeah, this allows you to do project-specific permissioning, right? Which can be really powerful. Doesn't it allow you to do roles as well? Like within the, remind me, Kiefer, does this allow you to pull information from the blueprint for specific roles? or no?
Are you talking about like how when it ties into portfolio work apps, like those rules?
Oh, yeah, no, never mind. We're good.
Yeah, the permissioning really kind of it gets complicated when you incorporate portfolio work apps, because then you're managing not only permissions but then roles and the permissions for those roles. So, but yeah, that's the last page. If I had made any changes, I would go ahead and save here. I don't believe I did, but just in case, I'm going to cancel.
Can we give one really quick just view of like, in case they really have not seen Control Center, can you just provision a project really quickly? And then I'll take it back. And I've got 2 slides about, hey, maybe you want to work with Kiefer because he's pretty cool. But why don't we create a project first?
Might turn off my camera for that last bit there so I don't blush too much. But we go back to our intake and we can see we have a project approved. We go into Control Center. I'm going to click Create Project. I'm going to select the blueprint that I know that project belongs to. This is where it's going to call out those different designations for the different templates, whether they're optional selected, optional not selected, which would look like that. But it's going to outline everything that it's going to create. Again, I think it's just covering itself to say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Are you sure you want me to do it? I'm going to hit next. It'll tell me what projects are available to provision. Project B sounds great. It's going to go ahead and populate the different data and profile data points from that intake. This is where you have the ability to edit any of those. If you denoted that piece of profile data as editable, you'd be able to come in here and say, hey, I want to provision this, but I don't want Molly as OCM lead. I want to change that right now. This is where you would do that. But then it's going to remind you of your sharing permissions, and then we're going to create the project.
Cool.
And within this loading screen, it's doing about 100+ steps every single time, and it's taking that manual effort off your plate. So
we're going to give it 1 more minute, and we're very excited to show it up. And then we'll go into just a couple things for Echo and a couple of other upcoming webinars and fun stuff, if in case you want to do more with us.
So here's the project. Here's the dashboard. It gave us that link. We go back to the intake sheet and refresh it. We're going to see that created box checked. We're going to see this new URL here. And our project has been created. So if we went to the workspace, which I think I have pulled up somewhere, we refresh this. And there's our project. We can click into it. We can see the different the templates that are part of our toolkit, and you're off and running.
Ooh, Kiefer's magic. All right.
Controls.
I will take ownership back. Thank you, Kiefer. All right, everyone. So couple of different things, right? So depending on where you guys are in your process, you might either be at the point where you're saying, hey, do we go to Smartsheet or not? You might be in a point in a process where you're saying like, hey, we're in Smartsheet, but we want to have a better toolkit so that we can have those really cool dashboards and everything like that. Or you might actually be, hey, we're starting to use Smartsheet, we have projects in it, but now we want to take it to the next level so we can scale. So all of those scenarios are things that Echo has worked with a variety of teams on. So we do have a Smartsheet solution page, and you are welcome to go to it. We have a Kickstart package literally for Control Center, where you can have someone like Kiefer or one of his team members here at Echo literally walk you through and configure a blueprint and teach you at a more granular level of how you can configure your own blueprints. So if you have recently purchased Advance, or maybe you already have and you just don't feel like you're really understanding all of the awesome capabilities of all their add-ons, this is a great opportunity for you. And or if you just want to reach out and talk to us a little bit more about what's going on, definitely you can go ahead and schedule a half-hour free consult with Echo. In terms of upcoming events, in terms of our next Smartsheet event, it is in June, and we're going to do another What's New in Smartsheet, and maybe you'll even get to talk to someone other than me. But the concept is we'll walk through some of the new features that they're doing. So we just a couple of days ago, they released some new features. We're super excited that finally, when you change a column name, it'll update all the reports. So if you haven't seen that yet and you're in Smartsheet, you'll know how awesome that is. But there's some other new features coming in as well. We are going to be trying to put out more and more content about Smartsheet Advance, about Control Center. So definitely stay tuned. If you don't already follow us, we have a significant channel on YouTube for Smartsheet and all the different capabilities that Smartsheet has. And we're going to be doing some more content both on Control Center as well as resource management and all the other add-ons that Smartsheet has as part of Advance. So we're always looking for new ideas on terms of content that people have that they're struggling with. There's a fantastic Smartsheet community. So if you don't want to follow us on YouTube, if you don't want to come in and sign up for updates so that you can know what the next webinars are, definitely consider Googling Smartsheet as a really strong community and a lot of solutioneers, not just Kiefer, but people that really want to lean in and solve problems and use Smartsheet to help them do that. So again, this is Molly. I'm Molly Yanis from Echo Consulting, and this is Kiefer Welsh. We have 4 minutes left. So in case